Good morning. Saturday morning, and we've had a significant amount of rain. So I'm really happy about that because it was like starting to look like Mars out here in Plano, Texas. So this morning we're going to do a debriefing on a personality profile. So this should be really fun. This person's named David. And what I'm going to do is going to go through the behavioral aspects first, which are related to the emotional intensities. And then I'm going to go through the 7 value elements separately and then together in an integrated motivational orientation, which is what they create. And then I will integrate the integrated motivational orientation with the behavior set. And that's what we do here at the Behavioral Resource Group. We do it for people and companies and kids, and not only just to show you what's going on, but to help you figure out what to do. All right, so I'm going to do a screen flip here so you can see what I'm looking at. All right, David, if you're watching, here we go. So the first thing we're going to look at basically is this here. So we've got these 2 emotions here. So we got the S in the disc. S represents submissive. Hey, Mike, you're welcome, buddy. S represents submissive, and the submissive emotion is the patience emotion. And David, you're coming in at a 98 on patience. That's as high as our algorithm goes. Hey, David, you're watching. Great. And so, Dave, your patience emotion is really tapped out. So this is called overextended. So anything above 89 on any given emotion here would be overextended. And what does overextended mean? Overextended means it can cause unwanted issues. Hi, Terry. Unwanted issues. And what does that mean? It means, and don't take this wrong, but you can become a danger to yourself and a danger to others. Now, let me define the word danger. I don't mean crazy or anything like that. What danger means is this particular emotion, or any of the emotions, when they're overextended, it means their intensity level is high and outside of the norm. The norm meaning where most people are. And so, depending upon what that is, other people will see it as maybe extreme. And so they will interpret you not in light of who you are, but in light of who they are. Because we never see people as they are, we only see them as we are. And I don't care who you are, that's what you do first. And it takes extra work to change that. And so, that being said, your C here, I'm going to just box this. The C, you're a 91. And being a 91 there means your fear emotion is overextended as well. So you got 2 overextensions so far. And so the fear emotion, fear doesn't mean you're afraid of the dark, okay? Fear means you have a heightened awareness of errors and mistakes. Now, this is also called conscientiousness, which means you have a very conscious mindset. And what a conscious mindset is, it's kind of the part of your brain where we would solve a math problem, we would plan an event, we would orchestrate some kind of a solution to a complex issue that we're facing. It's that part of the brain. It's not visceral like the limbic center where it becomes highly reactive. This is more, I would say, proactive. It's like thinking before you speak, thinking before you act, and ruminating what the outcomes could be, and then acting. So this creates 2 speeds. slow and slower. And the reason why slow and slower takes place, it's because the patient's emotion right here is an emotion that is security-based. Security-based. Now, what does security-based mean? It means you have somewhat of a safety consciousness. So I want you to think about dismantling a bomb. And that's what your brain is like. Your brain would be good at dismantling a bomb, maybe playing chess, where you're concentrating and thinking about your next move, and then taking into consideration whether that move is safe or not. So you have a strong safety set, because patience and fear, they run together in a pack. And when they come together, meaning when they're in play together, or meaning when they're above 50 on the profile lines here, then they tend to hold hands tightly. So in other words, patience and fear make a good team. Where do we see people like this? IT, we see these people, CPAs, any person who is a specialist in a particular area will likely have this. We see this in computer programming. We see this in financial advisement. We see this, a CPA. We see this, again, when there's a lot of concentration that takes place, formulating strategy, counting and doing math, counting numbers, where you're using logic and reason on a continuum, because you think logical and reasonably. So, David, you're a logical, stepwise thinker. So your brain is looking for order and systematic processes. You also have a stabilizing brain. And that, again, is the combination over here of patience and fear creates a stability. So you're like a piece of furniture. Once I put you there, odds are good it's not going to move on its own. So you're better at moving when there's an outside mover moving you. So moving yourself is difficult. Furniture doesn't move itself. I have to move the furniture, or the furniture doesn't tend to move, unless the dog jumps on it with a lot of speed and it slides across the floor a little bit. But your profile needs sort of a inciting incident in order to move you. An inciting incident, I want you to think of Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars. So Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars, he wants to go to the academy. He wants to become a Jedi like his father. He's got these dreams and aspirations. You can remember in the opening of the scene where he's living in that hole in the desert with his uncle and his aunt. He goes out at sunset and puts his leg up on the stone and leans on his knee, and he looks off into the distance, and he's kind of dreaming of what life could be like. The problem is he never makes any of that happen. And that's because Luke is a very high patient brain type. He doesn't make it happen. He hopes it happens. So the orientation associated with patience is hoping. So it's easier to hope than it is to actually do. And I'm going to show you why. Doing is over here. All right? So this is the doing emotion, and that emotion is anger. So anger is an emotion that does what is necessary. And as I talk about anger, I'm only talking about anger when it's in play. Okay? So that would be up here. Okay? So I want you to think of, if your anger emotion was up here, you would be very deliberate, very quick, and your brain would be seeing things in the world only for their usefulness. Okay, Terry, thanks for chiming in. You can always check this out later on. Appreciate you being here. So dominant brain types make things happen, and the way they make them happen is sort of a, depending upon how intense it is, kind of a no-holds-bar approach. So they don't tread softly, they just carry a big stick. And so it's a rumblesome type. It's very logical, it's very direct, and the goal is always the result. So because your anger emotion is coming in at a 34, David, that makes you the opposite of direct and causes you to be more indirect in your approach to the world. So rather than kicking the front door in with a shotgun, your brain likes to sneak around the back window with a jackknife. So what you will do is you would be passive aggressive, not aggressive. Everything you will do that takes, you got to really make something happen. Your brain tends to look for a back door, not the front door. And the reason why your brain doesn't like going in the front door, it's because you're too safety conscious. What's behind that door? Is their gun bigger than my gun? This kind of thinking. I don't know what's there, so it's smarter for me to sneak around the back window and look for signs of entry, or to see if there's somebody in there, and maybe I can take them by surprise. And so there's no energy for, quote, making things happen, because making things happen is, that scenario comes from anger. That's the emotion. All right, let's look at this emotion down here. This is optimism. It's associated with an I in the disc profile, because I stands for influence or influential, or inducement. And so inducement is a way to affect something. So let's talk about inducement in play, which would be above 50 up here. So that would be extremely limbic driven, reactive, intuitive, inspirational. So think of somebody giving an inspirational speech. They're very animated. Their hands are moving around as they're speaking. They're walking back and forth. You're listening to what they're saying, and you feel very moved. You might even shed some tears or get a lump in your throat. That's inspiring you. That's because they're limbically looping with you. In other words, they're able to plug into your limbic system, not your logistical center in your brain. And so you are moved by these people. Now, trying to do that with you, David, on a one-on-one is going to be difficult, because your limbic position is a 15, which is very low. It would be considered very low. Below 12 is extended, or we could say underextended. So because you have this low influence, and you've got this low influence, high patience and fear piece going on, this is what's making you very logical. So when your optimistic emotion is in play, you're emotional. When your optimistic emotion is less intense, you're logical. So you're a 15. A 15 means you can become incisive. You can become moody. You can become pessimistic, almost like you may act as the devil's advocate. In other words, positioning yourself from a logical framework on the other side of somebody's argument, and thinking through that argument. You might enjoy listening to somebody like Jordan Peterson or Dr. Sam Harris. If you have never heard of those people, look them up, because they come from a very logical perspective when they make their cases for whatever it is they're promoting, as far as a belief is concerned. And so having both anger and optimism in a lower position means your brain is passive or inactive. So active is way up here on anger and optimism. That's an active mind. When I say active, I mean it acts outside of itself. What happens with you is you act inside of yourself. So your thinking and ruminating is done more privately. And so you're likely going to rehearse your argument internally before you bring it into the external world. So you're going to think things through to some kind of a logical conclusion, and then you'll state the facts. So when people say to you, here's what I know, and you're like, where'd you get that information? And they say, well, just trust me, it is true. Your brain's like, I ain't trusting that. You probably don't know what you're talking about. And so if I'm going to go head to head with you on subject matter, I better have my ducks in a row, because you likely do have your ducks in a row, or you're likely not going to have that conversation. Because your brain doesn't like guessing. You either know or it's not up for discussion. So when I'm saying these things, I'm giving you the rules to the game. This also causes you to be introverted rather than extroverted. And what that means is you likely, David, have a very excited amygdala. So the amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, is likely, there's a lot going on in there. It's very excitable. So it means you're very aware of external happenings. And so when you read a book or when you think through a process, there's a lot going on in your mind. There's a lot of information, reorganization, orchestration. You're setting things up. You're rearranging the furniture all the time in your mind. You probably don't mind being alone at all, because you don't need to have a conversation with me. You're likely having a conversation with yourself. And what I mean by that is your brain loves to get away and think and process information. People that have an empty head have to step outside of themselves, and they process information externally. Okay? That would be an opposite profile. That would be over here. And so these are the people that think out loud. Should I do this or should I do that? I don't know. What do you think I should do? Blah, blah, blah. So, they're having to interact with other entities in an external fashion in an effort to come to a conclusion, because their brains don't like to come to conclusions on its own without reaching outside of itself and bringing something back in like a treasure. You don't need to do that. You have enough treasure in your own mind. And so your style is very ruminating. You can, this sounds terrible, but your brain can even slip into morbid fantasy. And just living out a systematic process of thinking in your mind, bereft of any other people. You could be locked in a room for days and it probably wouldn't bother you. and you would just be moving through all that processing in your mind. So you're a deep thinker in that respect. Now, this whole profile over here is basically known as your character base. This is what your brain has learned to do over the years that you've been alive, bringing in to consideration your formative years, school, parental dynamic, basically who's the strongest parent in the home. When I say strongest, I mean the one who carries the most weight when it comes to acting, making decisions, and things like that in a fast fashion. So you take all these positive and negative experiences and you formulate them over your life, and you create a solution for yourself as you're in the world. So your brain basically believes the best thing to do is keep my mouth shut, keep my brain open, and stay in here where it's safe, kind of a thinking process. Your style holds its cards, so you hold your cards like very close to your vest. You don't show your cards like this. You keep everybody guessing. So it's really hard to get to know your style. Now, anyone who knows you thinks they know you, but they don't. Nobody does. And it doesn't mean they don't experience you. It doesn't mean they don't enjoy you. It doesn't mean any of that. But your safe is never left open. Okay? So your brain rarely tells people where you actually stand on any issue. In other words, you might put one or two cards out on the table, but you've always got 3 cards in your lap. And why is this? This is because your brain is safety conscious. Is it safe to show all these cards? I don't know, so I'm not going to do it. And that's what happens. Now, some people, they lay all their cards out on the table face up. There's no guessing. They walk into a room, you look at their face, and you can say, all right, what's wrong? Like, it's all over their face. Like, David, your house could burn to the ground, and then you could the next day go to work, and nobody would know unless you wanted them to know. But it wouldn't be all over your face like, oh my God, you're white as a ghost. What happened? Like some people. You would look just as stoic as you always do. In other words, your face is not the place to look when we want to know what's going on with you. We have to look inside your mind, which I can't get to. So I'm left guessing. Good or bad? Neither. It isn't about good or bad. It isn't about right or wrong. It's how your wiring works. Now, this character base is somewhat, some of it's learned, some of it is in your DNA. So about 40% of who you are is coming down through the genome. You're probably, a lot like your father here. And so this profile, if you look at this red line, the anger emotion, the dominance, it's a 34, it drops down to a 15 in influence, then it jumps up to a 98 in patience, and then it slowly curves over here to a fear emotion, still high. So if you could imagine tracing this, it looks like a check mark or a music note. It goes check up. Check up. That's the perfectionist. So this is a logical, stepwise person who uses logic and reason to formulate strategies, who does all their work internally, who has two speeds, slow and slower, who is careful, considerate, conscientious, neat, exacting, and things like that. Is it safe to go in there? Is it safe to go out there? Is it safe to say this? Is it safe to do this? All these things have to be arranged into a certain kind of a framework before you will feel comfortable moving forward. So that's you being you, and we don't know where that takes place. I don't want you to think this is me when I'm at home, or this is me when I'm here. It's you when you're safe to be you. If you were dropped off at a desert island, this would be you. This is just who you are in your deepest sense of self. It's unconscious, so it's not something you're really aware of or thinking about unless forced into that position of having to think about it. All right, over here, this is you during your day-to-day at your job with your friends, blah, blah, blah. So we got a similar pattern. Boink, up. Check mark, up. Okay, so your patience and your fear are still in the same position, higher patience than fear, but both significantly in play because of this 50% point. You're really high up above this 50% point. So when you're outside with other people, you remain very logical. So your brain's a planning brain, a careful brain, a considerate. When I say considerate, I don't mean Mr. Nice Guy. Considerate means you have to consider consequences, outcomes before acting, as a rule. Now, there's one change that's taking place here, and that's way down here. So your influence, when you get out in the course of a day, drops down to a 2. So we've got an overextension, or we could say an underextension, because we're below 50 here. So your emotions pretty much turn off when you're out and about. You become, for a lack of a better way to put it, more like an android than a person. Good or bad? Neither. It's not about good or bad. It's not about right or wrong. But your brain positions itself to where, meaning this is your current state of affairs. You took this profile like, I don't know, last night or something like that. So this pattern, this TARP pattern over here, so see TARP right down here. This TARP pattern is probably good for a few months. So this is your day-to-day right now. So your what does TARP stand for? T is for taking, A is for attracting, R is for responding, P is for preserving. So you're a responsive brain type when you orient in the world. And that's right here. It's your highest emotional intensity, and it's a responsive emotion. What does that mean? It means your brain is better at hoping things happen, waiting for things to happen. You move over here to fear, doubting things will happen, rather than imagining things happening down here with an optimistic viewpoint. Oh my God, it's going to be amazing. I just know it. Your brain's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, last time we did that, it didn't work out as well. We better be careful because last time we did that, it rained on us. So make sure we bring something in case it might rain. Blah, 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 blah. So all the open, optimistic, fun people might think you're raining on their parade. But you see, people that are thinker, patient types, those people are realists. You want to live in the real world when with other people. So what your brain does is you're constantly probably bringing people back to reality. So somebody might be saying, oh my God, I bet we could make a ton of money doing that. And you're thinking, there's no way we're going to make a ton of money doing that. Number one, we have to be able to sell it. Number two, we got to do this. Number three, we got to do, like, your brain's going to calculate all these things out. And rather than just, imagine some amazing optimistic outcome, you're going to be like, well, I don't know. And then your doubt's going to kick in here. And it's like, do I really have the energy to pull that off over here? And the answer to that is no. So you might settle for what you can get instead of try to fight for what you want if you believe the odds aren't in your favor. Whereas your opposite personality type takes the chance and goes for it. Win, lose, or draw. It doesn't matter. They're just going to try it. So as you orient in the world, you're very similar to the way you always are. So this tells me, David, that your brain doesn't experience a lot of what I call brain change. And the reason being is because if you look at this here, you're very similar in shared existence as you are in separate existence. Shared existence is all about what other people expect from you. So if I expect you to get your ass moving and be really fast and get this thing done with this no-holds-bar approach, I can likely forget it because you're not that way naturally and you're not that way in shared existence. You're not that way by yourself on the desert island, and you're not that way when you're with a bunch of people who want to hurry up and make this happen. You're still the same way. So if you're with a bunch of people that are super risk takers, acting crazy, want to do this, you may enjoy and be intrigued by it, but to be able to do that yourself, it would only be under very certain circumstances. You realize what the outcome is more likely going to be based upon your calculations and things like that, or you've seen it happen so many times, the odds are in the favor of it actually working. But introverted brain types could look at something that has happened 1,000 times a certain way, and in your mind, you're going to be thinking, well, I know this has happened this way 1,000 times in a row, but there's still a possibility that it might happen a different way next time. And that's what introverts do. They're not depending upon any outside elements for their decisions. An outside element is really a form of outside data. So data outside of yourself, like Joe hits the ball 5 times. That's not you hitting the ball. That's somebody else in the outside world hitting the ball. Joe hits the ball 5 times, and every time Joe hit the ball, he hit it over the fence. Your brain is looking at that situation and thinking, it's possible that this next hit's not going to be outside the fence. It's just the way life is. You go into realism mode, and you want to calculate something that's coming from your own data, not the outside data. The outside data shows a consistent hitting record, but your inside data might take that on and say, well, the odds of, and become more subversive to that. And that's what thinkers do. People that don't think rely on external data to do their thinking for them. You don't. You want to come up with your own data as a rule. All right. I gotta take a breath. Hold on a second. My coffee's cold. All right, let's go over to your values framework. All right, and see what we got going on here. So the first thing we're going to look at is your aesthetic orientation. You're coming in at a 28. These boxes over here, these are the averages within half the population. So half the population and then the average of the half population are in the box. So you can see you're very low here. So you're literally out of the box here on aesthetic, which means you're a real world thinker. In other words, you have your feet on the ground as opposed to your head in the clouds. You're pragmatic. You're solid in your thinking. So the higher you go on aesthetics, You get up here, you can be mystical. You can be unorthodox. You can be unconventional in your thinking, super creative, and things like that. But you're not a creative type. You're a logical type. And that's here. Now, that's just one aspect. So this is called a consistency graph. It means consistently your brain leans into more matter-of-fact, logical, grounded ideas as a rule. Now we look at your economic standing. So the economic line is all about personal competitiveness. It's all about what am I going to get back from a concerted effort into an outside source. In other words, if I'm going to put a lot of energy into something, when I get done, I ought to have something to show for it. What does that look like? It looks like if you're, higher on this line, let's say you're getting up in this area, and I say, hey man, you busy on Saturday? And you're like, no, I'm not busy. Would you be willing to help me move? I just got to load up some stuff in a truck. I got a couple other people helping, blah, blah, blah. The higher you are on an economic line, the more you're thinking, okay, obviously I'm not getting paid because it's a friend, but hopefully there's pizza in it for me. Or something like that. Like, if I'm going to put energy into something, what is coming back in payment for the energy induced? And so when people are, way down here, they never ask themselves that question. So you are asking the question, but you're not pushing the question. Pushing the question is here in your behavior. So your behavior orientation would be an action. This is more a motivation. So this is a value. So this isn't how you do something. It's why you're doing it. So you're at 53. You're in the average. You're a little low. But because there's some other significant things happening here, this makes your economic line a little bit higher. So although you may want to get a lot out of something, you're going to find it difficult, especially with this over here, to voice that, to really round up the emotional energy to get that done and make that happen. Making things happen can escape you. Hoping things will happen or doubting they will happen, that's your primary source of energy, and that's coming from here. So because you have this fear emotion at an 80 here, and you got it over here at a 91 in your natural unconscious state of being, then your brain can see the whole world as a little bit cruel, cold, or even dark. So the outside world creates trepidation. So you have to protect what you have and keep it safe from hostile entities in the outside world that can come take what you've got. So this creates this P down here, which is a preserving mindset, holding on to what you have, not sharing too much information, not giving my combination to the lock to other people unless they're really proven safe, things like that. All right, back over here. We're going to look at your individualistic orientation over here in your value set. So you're coming in at a 40, and what this means is you don't like the spotlight. And so you're not hyper concerned about standing out separate, autonomous, and free from other people in the world as, okay, cool. You're not seeing yourself as a in need of being in the spotlight, getting the number one part in the play, stuff like that. You don't need that. Your brain is content to be behind the scenes doing what you do best without the fanfare. Now, some people, all they want is the fanfare. And so everything they do is in an effort to set themselves up, to set themselves apart from everybody else and be unique and different and amazing in the world. You don't have to do that. And because of that, all the emotional types could feel uneasy around you because you have a solid sense of self, meaning you could be working with other people and getting something done and be really happy that you solved the problem, but you don't need all the credit. People like you aren't, fighting for the credit because you're not emotionally attached or involved in the outcome. You're logically attached and involved with the outcome. A good example of that would be a Seinfeld episode where George Costanza, who's your direct opposite, George Costanza and Jerry were going out to pick up some food, and I think it was Elaine. She said, "Oh, when you guys are out, would you do me a favor and pick me up the big salad?" And so apparently there's the quote big salad, which was a particular salad that was associated with this particular restaurant that had some popularity about it. And so they went and did that, and they came back. And so when they came back, when they were out there, George paid for the big salad. He bought it for her. But when they got back to the house or wherever it was, Jerry handed her the salad. He said, "Here you go." I'm doing this from memory. I could be a little off on some of these dynamics. But Jerry gave her the salad. She goes, "Oh, thank you, Jerry." And so at that point, there's likely an assumption from Elaine's perspective that Jerry bought it because Jerry was holding it and Jerry gave it to her. Well, George is all bent out of shape because she thinks he didn't buy it when he did. So because George is a high individualistic and he's also a very high optimist, he wants the credit for paying for the salad. So what's funny about Seinfeld and the way these writers think is the whole rest of the show is George trying to get the credit for the salad. It's absolutely hysterical because we know human nature. So David, your brain type would be like, "Here's the salad," or somebody else could say, "Here's the salad," whatever, and you're not like going, "Oh my God, I didn't get the credit." Like, you probably don't care. In your mind, the goal was get the salad, give it to her, be done with it, let's move on. Kind of a thinking process. And so you could probably find something like that pretty funny. Okay. Power. Okay, you're up on power. When I say up on power, I'm not saying you're up on power in comparison to the country, which is these boxes here. You're up on power in comparison to yourself. Okay? Because if you look, it's your second highest line. Your score's at 58. Okay? This is below 58. Economics below 58. Individualistics below 58. Sacrificials below 58. And so you got all these belows. So this is your second highest line. It doesn't mean it's affecting you the most. It's affecting you in a fifth position. So that means it's not having as much an effect on you as number one is, or number two. Okay, and we'll get to those in a minute. So it is high though. So this means you want to control your own destiny. You want to control your own space. You want your hands on the wheel if you're in the car, so to speak. So you don't just want to climb in the back seat and just let somebody else drive in life. I don't mean in a real car. I'm using this as an analogy. you want to be behind your own wheels. So you have a control need, which means there's three types of control. You're either in control, under control, or out of control. Your need is to be in control of your own life, in control of your own space. So having your own life, having your own space, having your own car, having your own room, you're an owner. You have an ownership mentality. And this means when you're in a workspace, you're likely going to want to own your own stuff, own your own space, and likely be thinking about your future and where you're going from here, because you want to own your destiny. So you're thinking, if I want to move up or I want to do, like, you're kind of cognizant of those things. Now, there's a me conflict that kicks in here, because power and anger hold hands, but in your case, they're not holding hands, because your anger emotion lives in a diminished position, but your power need is not diminished. It's actually in play. And so what this creates is, it's sort of like wanting to be in charge, but then your brain finds it difficult to take charge. Why? Because your taking capacity out of 100 is only a 30. Okay? So I value ownership and being in charge of my life and my positions in life and what I do in life. I value being in charge of all that. But then when it comes time to take charge, it's like washing your feet with your socks on. There's something about it that your brain has to try to figure out, how can I do this? So rather than kicking in the front door with a shotgun, you're sneaking around the back window with a jackknife, trying to figure all this out first before it gets enacted. And if you're up against people whose dominance and anger is way up here and their patience is really low, it's an unfair fight. They show up with a shotgun and you show up with a BB gun. And so what will happen is a couple things. You'll subvert them, or you'll acquiesce. But inside you're thinking, damn, what the, and it creates a conundrum in your thinking. All right, the next thing, sacrificial. So you're not very sacrificial. You're at 23. And what this means is your brain is suspicious. You have a suspicious brain, which means you have a guard at your gate. So everybody's self is either guarded or unguarded. You have a very guarded profile. So you're guarded here, and you couldn't be more guarded here. You're a 98. My algorithm doesn't go any higher than that. So you're completely peaked out on guarded. Not showing your cards, not being able to read your emotions on your face. Oftentimes people will actually grow facial hair. You'll see that sometimes people that are like this, their face is like disguised. It's hard to see. They don't, it's masked. This is a mask, and it's always on. So getting to know you, David, I mean really, really getting to know you is going to be like breaking into a Brinks truck. It's really, really hard. I think I know you, and then I find out I don't. I really think I know you, and then I found out I don't. And this goes on. So you reveal your true self through a process of time release. Some medicines you take and they're in a capsule, and as long as it takes that capsule to melt, then the medication is time released. And that's what it's like with you. The longer I I know you, the more I start finding out. But it takes 80 years to get to the bottom of your well, because it's as deep as they come. So this is the deepness of your well. Some people's wells are like that deep. So I know everything there is to know about them in 10 minutes. Okay. When I met my wife for the first time, we started dating. I was like down here. Second date, she knew how many kids I wanted. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like every secret I could come up with, I told her. Of course, my wife's up here. So being married 27 years and finding things out about her, I never knew that I would have said on the first date. Good or bad, it depends. But neither in and of itself. It's always, how is that working out for you? Or how is that working out for the people closest to you? That determines good or badness. But good or badness in itself, it's not there. So sacrificial, suspicious. So your brain is more in a self-interested position. So when you're way up here on sacrificial, then you're abandoning your own needs and focusing your attention on the needs of everybody else. Sometimes, we can call that benevolence. We can call that, somewhat altruistic. Our reports have been saying altruistic. We're going to be changing it to sacrificial because it's just flat, not, this isn't really about empathy per se. Empathy feels people's pain. Sympathy understands people's pain. But being sacrificial or not sacrificial really isn't about other people's pain. It's about, listen, I've been standing in line for 4 hours. Why am I going to give up my spot to you? You just got here. Like, that's more what this is about. So your brain, if you're there and standing there for 2 hours, your brain doesn't want to give your spot to somebody else simply because, quote, they had a hard day. Your brain's like, well, maybe you should have thought of that and got here earlier. Or maybe you should have waited till you had a good day and then came on that day and came earlier. And you're going to address that whole situation from a logical, stepwise thinking point. And so also the guard at the gate piece here means it's sort of like feeling like your brain might feel like it was somehow burned in the past. I'm not saying you were burned in the past. You feel like you were burned in the past. It's an emotional mindset. I was burned in the past. I was hoodwinked in the past. Somebody really important to me really let me down. And so I'm not gonna open myself up to that again. So the less sacrificial a person is, the less likely they will display a strong sense of vulnerability. And when you're a very high patient brain type, you don't do vulnerability very well. In other words, your brain doesn't like being exposed. It's sort of like sneaking into your bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, ripping your bed sheets off, and there's 50 people standing there with cameras looking at you laughing, taking photos. That's what your brain can feel like if people come on too strong, too hard, and try to get to know you too quick and try to like break into your Brinks truck. Your brain starts to like go, oh my God, no. It's like having a dream where you're all of a sudden in the mall and you realize you're naked. So your brain doesn't like being exposed. And so what you'll do is you'll set yourself up to allow these things to happen through a longer process as you're vetting what you believe and think is going on through that process. Over here, your regulated thinking is a 51, which is actually pretty high. A 51 in your regulated thinking means that your brain is somewhat like an enforcer. If you believe you're right, your brain wants to enforce that on the outside world. And so this is a more of a black and white thinker than it is a gray thinker. So again, this feeds back into very logical thinking set. It's either right or wrong, good or bad, blah, blah, blah. There's no, well, so your brain tends to believe there's only one way to skin a cat, the right way, meaning the way that makes the most sense to me. So it doesn't have to be right in the sense of morality or anything like that. It just has to be right in line with what you think right is. So sometimes what you got to be careful of, David, with your brain, you can be so concerned about doing things in a way that you believe is right that you miss doing the right thing. Now, I know that sounds funny, but being too concerned about doing things right can get you in a position to where you miss doing the right thing. Sometimes the right thing doesn't seem logical. Sometimes the right thing is more of an arbitrary, coming from an arbitrary sense, sort of a imaginative / creative standpoint. And then in the end, we realize, wow, that really was the right thing to do. But your brain likely wants to be sure that all the puzzle's pieces fit together before I put the puzzle together. And what that can do is put you into a position of believing you're correct regardless of the circumstances. So your brain might just dig your heels in, hold your fort, and not budge. And so this is a form of dogmatism when it comes to what you think is right. So I'm not talking about what is right outside of you in some kind of a truth context out there in the world, because there's many variations of that as well. I'm talking about within your own mind. Your way is right no matter what in your own thinking. So once you settle on what you believe is right, you'll likely sort of defend it to the death until proven otherwise, but that proof can only come through logic and reason, not hype, emotion, or any of those things. And then finally, coming up on an hour here, so this is good. Your highest value is theoretics. So your brain, you can see how far out of the national box you are. You're like in the top 1%, or I should say, this small group of 1%, 94, it's probably less than 1%. Maybe it's about 0.7 out of 1% of the population is where you're at here. This means you're an extremely deep thinker. You have a mind like a private investigator. You want to get to the bottom of things, and so your brain will want to rabbit trail deeper and deeper down into the rabbit hole. Sort of like if you've ever watched the movie The Da Vinci Code. Like every time they turn around, there's another thing to discover, and there's another hole to go down, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's like no ending to it. That's what your brain does. Your brain doesn't shut off. If you worked at, I've used this illustration before. Let's say you worked at Home Depot, and I came in there and said, you guys sell hurricane clips, and let's say you worked in the building department. Odds are pretty good you tell me exactly where they were, row, shelf, box, and then how many are in the box. It's that kind of a thing. It's like, yeah, they're on aisle 8 all the way down on the left, bottom shelf. We got about 9 left, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Like, that's how your brain is functioning. And so it's extremely detailed oriented. You look like a scientist. And so this is a lot like my son Matthew. You guys are very, very similar. Very, very, very similar. Except for some of these values are very different. Maddie's very low on echo, and very high on aesthetic and all that. So Maddie's a creative, whereas you're a pragmatist, David. But so your greatest strength is going to be in the realm of research, and I find people like you sometimes in quality control positions, and things like that. So very, very powerful. A couple things to think about. If you're not careful, you can slip into analysis paralysis, where you overthink everything, and you pay too much attention to getting to the bottom. And even if there is a bottom, you'll create another bottom, because you get bored when you're not cognitively challenged. So you will always have to seek a place in your life where your cognitive control set in your brain is consistently challenged. So you're the lifelong learner. You never stop learning. Your life is basically school, and you're constantly taking in new information. You have an itchy brain. The only way to scratch it is to learn something you didn't know before. So you're always expanding your knowledge base, and making sure you're getting all that information. So an overall, picture of this profile here is sort of I'd say like a passive-aggressive scientist, that if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'd be better off not really talking to you about it, especially if you're passionate about the subject matter. You might be able to cut me off very quickly and write me off instantly and not feel bad about it. You may have an emotional distance between you and everybody else in the world, and the greater the emotional distance we have, the less we are able to see and feel the pain of other people. And so your mind is sort of like it's just business. It's not personal. You're likely able to separate your emotions out from any dynamic and then put them in when necessary, which means you can do difficult things and not have it hijack your emotional center. Over here, you just look like an engineer. This is kind of an engineering perfectionist profile. So all your strength is in the capacity of your mind to be able to think, calculate, orchestrate, plan, and things of that sort. Criticisms of your work ethic will cut to the heart, because you're likely putting a lot of energy and time into the way you think and do things. So when someone makes fun of it or talks bad about it, it's offensive to your mind. Things like that. I mean, I could go on and talk for another 2 hours, I think, about this, but those are kind of the high points. So I hope, Dave, that was helpful for you. I hope you, like a cow, can eat the hay and leave the sticks. My accuracy rate is probably around 90 to 94%, maybe. I don't know, somewhere around there. But if you were an honest Abe when you took this, then what I said is pretty realistic. There's a lot of nuancing in there that if you had other questions, if we were having a conversation, you were sitting here with me, then I'd be able to answer that straight away. But as a rule, I just gave you the rules to your mind game here. So there you have it. I hope this is helpful, and we'll be doing some other people coming up that have requested to have theirs done. Have a great rest of the weekend. And I gotta switch back here so I can see what's going on. Yeah, so that's it. We'll chat later. Thanks, and super helpful. All right, Dave. Great. Glad you liked it. You can always shoot me an email if you have a question, and I'll answer it. Have an awesome weekend. Bye-bye.